scared to actually read it. I just wanted to know what I was destroying, and even that felt like too much. She pressed her palms briefly against her eyes. Names. A list of names. Numbers next to them, like accounts, dollar amounts maybe, I don't know. I didn't understand any of it. And one name written bigger than the rest, underlined twice, like he wanted whoever eventually found it to see that one name before any of the others. Do you remember the name? Nina's eyes met his, and something in her chest went very still, the way it did right before admitting something she'd never said out loud to anyone. Delgado, she said. Mateo exhaled, slow, controlled, like something in his chest had just confirmed a suspicion he'd been carrying since the restaurant. Diego worked for him, Mateo said quietly, after a long moment. Not directly. A courier. Low level. Moving money he probably didn't fully understand the weight of until it was already too late to walk away clean. 5 years ago, a significant amount of money went missing from one of Delgado's operations. Delgado blamed my organization, started a quiet war over territory he believed I'd stolen from him to cover it. The truth was simpler and uglier. Somebody inside his own crew had been skimming for months, and your brother found out. So he ran. He tried to run, Mateo said. But before he ran, he came to me first. Did you know that? Nina's breath caught somewhere in her throat. No, I didn't know that at all. 3 days before he disappeared, he showed up at one of my properties asking to speak with someone in my family. I wasn't there that day. My father was, and my father turned him away at the door, told him we don't get involved in another family's internal mess, especially not for a courier, nobody important enough to matter. Mateo's voice had gone tight, something old and unresolved moving underneath it, something that sounded, to Nina, dangerously close to guilt he'd never fully put down. A week later, Diego was gone. Delgado's men found him before anyone else could. Nina sat with that for a long moment, the shape of it settling into her chest like a stone dropped into still water, spreading outward slowly. You knew this, she said, her voice quieter now, but sharper too. Some version of this. And you're only telling me now. I found out the full shape of it last night, Mateo said. From the man downstairs. I suspected pieces of it before. Enough to put a flag on your name. Enough to have someone watching you. But I didn't have confirmation until a few hours ago. Nina looked at him. 5 years of grief and unanswered questions rising in her throat all at once, and found she didn't yet know whether to be grateful for the truth or furious that it had taken a gun in a restaurant to finally reach her. She found him 3 hours later in the room with the monitors, unshaven, a cup of coffee gone cold at his elbow, scrolling through what looked like old case files on a laptop screen. The gray morning light through the reinforced windows made the room look colder than it already was, all concrete and steel, and the low blue glow of surveillance feeds nobody was watching. Nina stood in the doorway for a moment before she spoke, studying him, the way his shoulders sat too rigid for a man who'd supposedly slept, the way his thumb kept tracing the same corner of the laptop like a nervous habit he wasn't aware of. I want to see everything, she said finally. Whatever you found last night, whatever your family's files say about my brother, all of it. No more pieces handed to me one at a time, like you're deciding how much I can carry. Mateo looked up, and something in his face told her he'd been expecting this conversation, maybe even rehearsing it, and still hadn't found a version of it he liked. There's something else, he said. Of course there is. She crossed the room and sat across from him, arms folded, bracing herself the way she'd learned to brace for bad news in restaurants. Table 6 is about to complain, Table 12 is about to walk out on the check, some new disaster arriving dressed as a customer. Except this wasn't a table of strangers. This was her brother's death, and the man who might have had a hand in it, sitting 3 feet away with a laptop he didn't want to turn toward her. He turned it anyway. On the screen was a surveillance photograph, grainy, time-stamped 5 years ago in the corner. Her brother, thinner than she remembered, cheekbones too sharp, dark circles she hadn't noticed in her own memory of him because memory was kind that way. standing outside a building she didn't recognize, deep in conversation with a man whose face was turned just enough away from the camera to be unclear. "Who is that?" she said, though something in her chest already suspected the answer before he said it, some old animal instinct, recognizing the shape of a lie about to be corrected. "Me," Mateo said, 3 days before Diego disappeared. The room went very quiet. "You told me your father turned him away," Nina said slowly, each word deliberate, like she was testing the weight of them before she let them fully land. "You told me you weren't there. You said it yesterday, sitting right where you're sitting now." "My father turned him away publicly," Mateo said, quiet, steady, absorbing the anger she hadn't even fully released yet, like he'd already decided he owed her the right to be angry without flinching from it. "At the front, in view of the men who work the door, because that's how these things are handled. A low-level courier from a rival organization doesn't get an audience, not officially, not where anyone can report back that the DeLuca family entertained him. That's the version everyone above me was told. And the unofficial version. I met him myself, 2 days later, without my father's knowledge, at a location he wouldn't have approved of, because something about the way Diego had been dismissed didn't sit right with me." Mateo's jaw worked, like the memory cost him something physical to retrieve. "I was 28. I didn't run the organization yet. Not officially, but I had enough authority to move quietly if I chose to. I chose to. Why? Because he didn't look like a man trying to scam his way into protection," Mateo said. "I'd seen that look before. Men who show up desperate, inventing threats to buy themselves leverage. Your brother didn't look desperate for leverage. He looked desperate for someone to believe him." Nina's hands had curled into fists in her lap, though she wasn't entirely sure if the anger was at Mateo, at Delgado, at her brother, or at the entire 5 years she'd spent believing a story that had never been the full truth. Maybe all of it at once. Maybe that was allowed. "And what did he tell you?" she said. "The real version, not the version you gave me yesterday. That he had proof Delgado's second-in-command was skimming money and pinning the losses on my organization to manufacture a war between us," Mateo said. "He had documentation, numbers. He wanted protection in exchange for handing it over. Enough money to disappear somewhere Delgado couldn't reach. Enough distance that he'd never have to look over his shoulder again. And you said no. I said I needed to verify it first." Mateo's voice had gone rougher now, the careful control fraying at the edges in a way she hadn't heard from him before. Not even in the warehouse, not even with a gun in his hand. That was the correct procedure. That was what any rational head of an organization does when a stranger walks in, claiming to have evidence that could start or stop a war. You verify, you don't act on a single desperate man's word alone, because acting too fast gets people killed just as easily as acting too slow. "But you didn't just say no," Nina said, something in her voice sharpening, cutting straight through whatever justification he was building. "You said something else. What was it?" Mateo was quiet for a long moment, and Nina watched him choose the truth, deliberately, the way she was starting to realize he always eventually chose it, even when it cost him. "He specifically told me he had a younger sister," Mateo said, "that he was afraid Delgado's people would eventually connect the two of you if he didn't move fast enough. He asked me, specifically asked me, if my protection could extend to you too, in case anything happened to him before he could get you both somewhere safe." Nina felt something cold slide down through her chest. "And what did you say to that?" "I told him I'd think about it," Mateo said, "that I needed to verify what he was claiming before I put my organization between two families over one courier's word, and that included any promises about extended protection. I told him to come back in a week, once I'd had time to look into it properly." "A week," Nina repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "You told my brother, who was terrified enough to beg a stranger for protection for his sister, to come back in a week." "Yes." "He was dead in 5 days." "Yes," Mateo said again, and this time his voice cracked, just slightly, at the very edge of the word. The first real crack she'd heard in him since the restaurant. I found out 2 days after it happened. Delgado's men had already found him. Whether it was luck, or someone talking, or Diego simply making a mistake, trying to buy himself more time, I never fully confirmed. I told myself there was nothing I could have done differently. That verifying the claim was standard procedure, that a man in my position can't act on every desperate story that walks through his door, that if I'd moved too fast on unverified information, it could have started a war that killed far more people than just him. Did you actually believe that? Nina asked. Or did you just need to believe it so you could keep sleeping at night? Mateo looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his face that looked almost like relief. The relief of a man finally being asked the question he'd been asking himself for 5 years, by someone who had every right to demand an honest answer. Both, he said quietly. I believed it enough to function. I never fully believed it enough to stop thinking about it. I told myself that for 5 years, Nina. And then 3 weeks ago, a flag I'd left on your name from that meeting 5 years earlier triggered again, and I found myself standing outside a restaurant, watching a waitress laugh at something a coworker said. And I thought, there she is, the sister he was trying to protect. And some part of me that had been waiting 5 years for exactly this chance decided I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. So this whole time, Nina said slowly, putting the pieces together out loud, watching each one land somewhere new and painful in her chest. You weren't protecting a stranger. You were trying to fix something you'd failed to fix 5 years ago. At first, Mateo admitted, that's the honest answer. At first, this was about a debt I owed a dead man I'd let down. Guilt, dressed up as protocol, dressed up as protection. And now, something shifted in his expression. Something that had nothing to do with guilt or debts or 5-year-old failures. Something rawer and more immediate. Now it's not about him at all, Mateo said. It stopped being about him somewhere in that car, watching you refuse to fall apart even though every part of your night had earned you the right to. It stopped being about guilt the moment I realized I wasn't watching you out of obligation anymore. I was watching you because I wanted to know what you'd do next. Nina sat with that for a long moment, chest tight, grief and anger and something else entirely tangled together in a knot she didn't have the energy to untangle yet. Not with her brother's face still glowing on the laptop screen between them, thinner than she remembered, terrified in a way she'd never gotten to ask him about. You should have told me this last night, she said finally. Quiet now, the fight gone out of her voice, replaced by something heavier. The moment you learned it. Not hours later, not after I already thought I understood the shape of what happened to him. I know, Mateo said. You should have told me the moment you grabbed me in that restaurant, before any of this, before I started trusting you. I know that too, Mateo said, and he didn't look away from her, didn't soften it, didn't offer her an easier version of himself to be angry at. I was afraid that if I told you everything at once, you'd see me as part of the reason your brother died, instead of the reason you're still breathing tonight. And the truth is, Nina, I wasn't sure myself which one was true. I'm still not entirely sure. Which one do you think is true now? Mateo held her gaze, steady, unflinching, offering nothing but the truth, for the first time since the gun had gone off in that restaurant 2 nights ago. Both, he said. I think I failed him. I think if I'd trusted my instincts instead of protocol, your brother might still be alive. And none of this, the fire, the warehouse, any of it, would ever have touched you at all. And I think, at the same time, that I am not going to fail you the same way. I need you to understand those 2 things can both be true at once. Because I'm done making this easier to hear than it actually is. You deserve better than a comfortable version of the truth. The message came at noon. Delivered the way Delgado always delivered things. Indirect, deniable, impossible to trace back to a single hand. A news alert. A fire at a storage facility on the east side, registered under a shell company that, if anyone bothered to dig, traced back 3 layers deep to Nina's landlord. Her apartment building. Not touched, just close enough, just visible enough, to be a message instead of an accident. Mateo read the alert twice before he showed it to her. "He's not trying to kill me this time," Nina said slowly, staring at the photo of smoke, curling into a gray sky 4 blocks from the only home she'd had for 6 years. "He's trying to scare me. He's trying to flush you," Mateo corrected. "There's a difference. A dead woman can't lead him to what he wants. A frightened one might run somewhere useful." Useful to who? To him. If Delgado still believes Diego's evidence exists, the names, the accounts you told me about, he thinks you might bolt for it. Go retrieve it, hide it somewhere new, contact someone you shouldn't. He's not hunting you directly right now. He's watching to see where you run. Nina's jaw tightened. So the fire wasn't random. Nothing Delgado does is random. Mateo set the tablet down, his expression gone hard in a way she'd started to recognize. Not anger exactly, but the particular stillness of a man recalculating a battlefield in real time. This is a test. He wants to see if fear moves you. If it does, he'll have men watching every road out of this city, waiting to see where you land. And if it doesn't move me, then he escalates, Mateo said. Because a woman who doesn't run either has nothing to hide, or has decided to fight instead. Nina looked down at the photo again. Her building, smoke, the dry cleaner on the corner where she'd bought coffee every morning for 6 years, and felt something shift inside her chest, cold and clarifying, the fear from 2 nights ago curdling slowly into something with sharper edges. "I'm not running," she said. "Nina, I said I'm not running." She looked up at him, steady now, the shake gone from her voice entirely. "You said it yourself. If I run, I hand him exactly what he wants, so I'm not giving him that." Mateo studied her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. "That's not the only option available to you. You could disappear properly. New city, new name, resources I can provide, a life Delgado never finds because there's nothing left of the old one to trace. You're offering to make me vanish. I'm offering to keep you alive." "Those aren't the same thing," Nina said, and something in her voice had gone quiet and fierce at once. "I've spent 5 years already disappearing, Mateo. 5 years of not asking questions, not looking for my brother too hard, making myself small and forgettable so nothing would ever come looking for me. And it found me anyway. So no, I'm not doing 5 more years of that. If Delgado wants to flush me out, he can watch me stand exactly still." Enzo appeared in the doorway before Mateo could answer, his face carrying the particular tightness of a man delivering worse news on top of bad. "Second message just came in. Delgado's people were seen near the restaurant an hour ago, asking about her by name. Not subtle about it. He wants her to know he's looking," Mateo said, half to himself. "There's more," Enzo said. "They asked specifically about her shifts, whether she'd been in this week, whether anyone had seen her with a man matching your description." Nina felt the floor tilt slightly under that piece of information. "He knows I'm with you." "He suspected," Mateo said. "Now he's confirmed it." He was quiet for a moment, jaw working, something calculating behind his stillness that made her nervous in a way the gun hadn't. "This changes the timeline. He's not going to wait for you to run anymore. If he can't flush you out, he'll try to draw me out instead. Hit somewhere he thinks I'll overreact to protect. Which means we stop waiting for his next move," Mateo said, "and start making him react to ours." They argued about it for an hour, Mateo pacing the length of the safe house's main room, while Nina sat on the arm of the couch, arms crossed, refusing to be talked out of the only decision that had felt like hers since the gun went off 2 nights ago. "You want to use yourself as bait," Mateo said, for the 3rd time. Like repeating it might make it sound more insane than it already did. "I want to stop hiding," Nina said. "There's a difference, and you know it. You just don't like where it puts me. It puts you directly in front of a man who's already tried to kill you once. And it puts him directly in front of a man who's currently the only reason I'm still breathing," she said, nodding at him. "You said it yourself. He's escalating because he can't flush me out quietly. So let's stop being quiet. Let him come to me somewhere you control, instead of somewhere he does. Mateo stopped pacing. You're talking about a trap. I'm talking about taking back the one thing he spent 2 days trying to take from me, Nina said. Control. He wants me scared and running. I'd rather be standing exactly where he can see me, on ground you've already secured, with men you trust watching every angle he might use. That's not bravery, Nina. That's a woman who hasn't slept properly in 2 days, making a decision out of anger. Maybe, she said, or maybe it's a woman who spent 5 years being told, by everyone, including herself, that she wasn't important enough to matter to men like Delgado, and finding out that was a lie doesn't scare her the way you think it should. It makes me furious, and I'd rather do something useful with that than sit in a safe house waiting for you to fix it for me. Something shifted in Mateo's expression. Not agreement exactly, but the particular respect of a man recognizing an argument he couldn't dismantle with logic alone. If we do this, he said slowly, it's on my terms, my men, my location. You do exactly what I say, when I say it, no improvising. I can work with terms. I mean it, Nina. This isn't a negotiation about your independence. This is the difference between you walking away from this and you not. I understand the stakes, she said, quieter now, meeting his eyes without flinching. I understood them the second I saw that gun. I'm not being reckless. I'm done being someone else's loose end to clean up. Mateo held her gaze for a long moment, and something in his face softened, just slightly, at the edges. You know, he said, most people I bring into this world fall apart within the first 48 hours. You've had a gun aimed at your chest, learned your brother was murdered because of a decision I made, found out I've been watching you for weeks, and instead of falling apart, you're negotiating terms for how you want to fight back. Is that a compliment? It's terror, mostly, Mateo admitted, and there was something almost like a smile at the edge of it. You're the least helpless person I've put in this house in a long time, and I don't know what to do with that except respect it. Then respect it enough to let me help, Nina said. Not as bait you're managing, as someone standing next to you, doing this on purpose. He was quiet for a moment, and she watched him make a decision, the way she'd watched him make every decision since the restaurant. Fast. Once he'd committed, no half measures after. Fine, he said. We do it my way, with your terms folded into the plan. But the second I say move, you move. No arguing, no proving a point. Agreed? Agreed, Nina said, and felt, for the first time in 2 days, like the ground under her feet belonged to her again, instead of to whoever was hunting her across it. Mateo turned to Enzo, already pulling up a floor plan on the tablet, voice shifting into the low, efficient cadence of a man building a trap instead of running from one. Get me everyone we trust in this city, he said. Delgado wants to draw us out. Let's give him exactly what he's asking for. The warehouse Mateo chose sat 2 blocks from the water, chosen for the same reason a spider chooses a particular corner. Angles, exits, the illusion of an easy approach that was, in truth, no approach at all. Nina stood where he'd told her to stand, in the open, visible from the loading doors, closer to danger than every instinct in her body wanted to be. Enzo was 15 feet to her left, unseen, a shadow among crates. 2 more of Mateo's men held the rafters above. Mateo himself was nowhere Delgado's men would think to look, until it was already too late for them to matter. Delgado didn't come himself. Men like him never did. 4 cars pulled into the lot at 9, headlights cutting white across concrete, and 6 men stepped out with the loose, confident posture of people who believed they were walking into an ambush of their own making instead of someone else's. Nina's pulse hammered, but her hands stayed steady at her sides, exactly as Mateo had told her. Alvarez, the lead man, called, weapon low but ready, scanning the warehouse with the practiced eyes of someone who'd done this before. Delgado wants a conversation. Come quiet, and this doesn't have to get ugly. I don't think I will, Nina said, and was almost surprised by how level her own voice came out. The man's mouth curled. Unbothered. already raising his weapon toward the space where she stood. He never got the chance to finish the motion. Matteo came out of the dark the way she imagined violence must have always lived inside him, coiled and patient and finally released. It wasn't loud. That was the thing that stayed with her longest. Afterward, how little sound there was to something so absolute. A blur of motion from the shadows along the east wall. The lead man down before his second shot ever cleared the holster. Enzo moving from the crates in the same breath. Fast and economical. No wasted motion anywhere in the room. Nina had braced herself for chaos. What she got instead was precision. A violence so controlled it barely looked like violence at all. More like a door closing, inevitable and final, on 6 men who had walked in believing they held every advantage. It was over, in under a minute. Matteo stood in the center of it afterward, breathing controlled, jacket still buttoned, not a single hair out of place, and looked entirely, terrifyingly calm for a man who just ended 6 lives in the space of a heartbeat. He crossed the warehouse floor toward her, and Nina found she wasn't afraid of him. That surprised her more than the violence had. Standing in a room that smelled like cordite and concrete, watching a man capable of exactly this walk toward her, with his hands still loose at his sides, and feeling nothing but relief that he was the one standing between her and everyone else in the world who wanted her gone. "Are you hurt?" he said, voice low, checking her over with quick, efficient eyes. "No." Her own voice came out steadier than she expected. "You didn't kill all of them. One's alive," Matteo said, deliberately. "He's going back to Delgado with a message I don't need to deliver twice." "What message?" "That the girl he wants erased isn't a loose end anymore," Matteo said, quiet, final. "She's mine, and the next time he sends someone after her, I stop sending messages back through hired men. I come myself." Something in the way he said it, flat, absolute, no performance in it at all, settled into Nina's chest like a stone dropped into still water, spreading out slow and heavy and undeniable. "You didn't have to be that thorough," she said. "Delgado only understands one language," Matteo said. "I needed him to hear it clearly enough that this doesn't happen twice." She looked around at the wreckage of a plan that had, hours ago, terrified her enough to argue with him for a full hour about whether it was worth the risk, and found, standing in the middle of it now, that she didn't regret a single moment of choosing to stand her ground instead of running. "It's done," she said. Not quite a question. "Tonight, it's done," Matteo said. "Delgado doesn't stop easily, but this buys you something you haven't had since that gun went up in the restaurant." "What's that?" "Room to breathe," he said. "And a choice, finally, about what happens next." They stood on the safe house roof, 3 nights later. The city spread out gold and glittering below them. The kind of view Nina had spent 6 years serving wine to people who never once looked up long enough to appreciate it. "Delgado's men have gone quiet," Matteo said. "My contacts say he's pulling back, at least for now. Regrouping. It won't last forever, but it buys you time to decide what you actually want." "Meaning?" "Meaning I can put you somewhere new," he said. "Clean papers. New city. A life with no trace of Delgado. No trace of me. No trace of any of this. You'd be safe, Nina. Properly safe. Not just safe because I happen to be standing next to you." "And the other option?" Matteo turned to face her fully, something unguarded moving across features that had, 3 days ago, felt entirely unreadable to her. "The other option is you stay. In my world, which is dangerous and complicated and will never again look like the quiet life you had before that gun came up in the restaurant. I won't pretend that's the safer choice. It isn't, but it's the honest one." "Honest how?" "Honest in that I don't want to put you somewhere new," he said, quiet, rough at the edges in a way she hadn't heard from him before. "I want you to stay because I chose to protect you, and somewhere in the last 3 days, that stopped being about guilt over your brother and started being about you. I'm not going to pretend otherwise to make the choice easier." Nina looked out at the city, at the life she'd built in it. Small, careful, forgettable, on purpose, and thought about 5 years of making herself invisible, so nothing would ever come looking for her. and how a stranger's hand on her wrist in a crowded restaurant had ended all of that in less than a minute. "I spent 5 years disappearing," she said. "I'm not interested in doing it again, even if it's safer. Nina, I want to stay," she said, turning to face him fully, steady, certain, nothing shaking in her voice at all. "Not because you offered protection, because for the first time since Diego disappeared, I'm not hiding from anything. I'd rather stand in danger next to you, on purpose, than be safe and invisible somewhere I didn't choose." Mateo closed the distance between them, slow, deliberate, giving her every chance to step back the way he had every single time since the restaurant. She didn't. "You understand what you're choosing," he said quietly. "This isn't a fairy tale ending. This is a life." "I know exactly what I'm choosing," Nina said. "I chose it the moment I refused to run." He kissed her then, finally, unhurried, despite everything they'd survived to reach this rooftop, and Nina felt the last of the fear from that restaurant floor dissolve into something steadier, something that felt, for the first time in 5 years, entirely like her own decision. If you loved watching her choose danger on her own terms, hit subscribe to Mr. Mafia Boss, because this is where the dangerous men live, the women refuse to be victims, and every story hits harder than the last. New sizzling mafia romance drops every day, packed with slow-burn tension, brutal loyalty, and endings you won't see coming. And before you go, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I might just give you a shout-out in the next story.